"Leave my wife out of this, Caroline." The words cut through the noise like a clean blade. The studio, moments ago humming with chatter and applause, fell still. The hum of the air system became the only sound. Across from Senator Daniel Reeves, Congresswoman Caroline Marsh blinked, unsure whether she'd misheard him. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone, steady, low, deliberate, carried more weight than a shout ever could. He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded, every movement calm. "You just made my family part of your argument," he said, eyes locked on hers. "That wasn't about policy. That was personal, and that was a mistake." Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters at the press table scrambled to jot every word. A few phones lifted, cameras already rolling for clips that would hit social media within minutes. Caroline shifted in her chair, her practiced smile faltering. "Senator Reeves," she began, forcing a light laugh that didn't quite land. "We're having a debate. A little pushback isn't personal." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just waited. The silence made her words crumble under their own weight. He opened a thin binder marked with colored tabs. "Last spring," he said, flipping to a page, "you wrote in your op-ed that using someone's family to score political points is the fastest way to lose the public's trust." He looked up. "Your words, not mine." A low murmur spread through the crowd. The moderator glanced toward the control room. Caroline swallowed hard. "That was a different situation," she said, her tone tight. "Context doesn't change a principle," Daniel replied evenly. "You set a line. You just crossed it." The audience reacted, a mix of gasps, whispers, and the faint click of reporters' keyboards. Caroline's confidence drained from her face as she realized what he'd done. He hadn't attacked her. He'd held up a mirror. Trying to regain ground, she turned back to the camera. "We're here to talk about ethics in government," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Let's not get sidetracked." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "It was about ethics," he said, "until you made it about me." The words landed like a verdict. Even the band in the corner, waiting for the outro cue, froze mid-motion. The moderator tried to move on, but the energy in the room had shifted. What began as a standard policy debate had become a masterclass in restraint and a warning shot about integrity. Daniel had done more than defend himself. He had redefined the tone of the entire conversation. After the cameras cut, no one spoke for several seconds. The audience, journalists, even the crew seemed to process what they'd just witnessed, a rare moment when decency had outshone performance. Later that night, clips of the exchange went viral under the headline, "Reeves reminds the nation, integrity still matters." For once, the internet wasn't cheering the loudest voice in the room. It was applauding the calmest. Reporters scribbled furiously, drawing arrows back to the moment she mentioned his wife. The anchors, leaning forward in their seats, whispered off mic, "He's turning the tide." What had started as a lively political debate now felt like a courtroom, each word deliberate, each pause heavy with meaning. Senator Daniel Reeves wasn't arguing anymore. He was building a case. By the 10-minute mark, the energy in the studio had shifted completely. Congresswoman Caroline Marsh, who had entered the debate with effortless command, now found herself cornered by her own rhetoric. Reeves sat poised, his folder open, pages marked with precise tabs, calm radiating from his every movement. The audience, producers, and journalists all knew they were witnessing something different, a reckoning playing out live before millions. The red studio lights blinked steadily, as if marking every beat of tension. Caroline's earlier confidence had dissolved into restless glances and forced smiles. Her cue cards were bent at the corners from the tightness of her grip. Reeves didn't flinch. He leaned slightly toward his microphone, his tone even but carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of discipline and principle. "Caroline," he said, "you've spoken many times about keeping personal lives out of politics. You said, and I quote, that dragging families into public disputes destroys trust in leadership." The air in the room seemed to freeze. The audience recognized the quote immediately. It was from one of her most watched interviews, one she had proudly circulated across her campaign pages. Gasps rippled through the front rows. Reporters underlined "destroys trust" in their notepads, connecting it to her earlier jab about Reeves's wife. Behind the glass wall, producers leaned closer to their screens. "He's using her own playbook," one murmured. The director didn't cut away. He knew history was happening in real time. Caroline sat upright, her jaw tight, fingers tapping her cue cards. "Senator Reeves," she said, forcing composure. "We're here to talk about ethics and governance." "You're twisting my words." Reeves didn't respond immediately. He flipped to another page, his movements deliberate. The silence stretched long enough for the tension to settle like smoke over the room. "No," he said finally, voice steady. "I'm repeating them. You called personal attacks a coward shortcut. You said they erode the public's faith in us. Those were your words." The split-screen cameras showed Caroline blinking, the confident poise slipping from her features. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water. Reeves remained still, his eyes calm but unyielding. He wasn't performing. He was reminding everyone what integrity looked like under pressure. "Let's talk about ethics," he continued. "Not as a slogan, but as a standard. You wrote that a leader's first responsibility is to honor their own principles, even when it's inconvenient. Do you still believe that?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence spoke louder than any defense. The audience leaned forward, breath held, phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. Even the band, waiting for the outro cue, stayed frozen, sticks midair. The clock ticked past 12 minutes. The moderators dared not interrupt. Reeves closed his folder softly and folded his hands. "Caroline," he said, not unkindly, "if we lose sight of decency while chasing victory, we lose more than an argument. We lose ourselves." The sentence lingered like an echo. No one moved. The audience didn't clap. They absorbed it. The control room crackled with low whispers. Someone muttered, "This is gold," while another added, "And it's real." When the broadcast ended, the clip spread across networks within minutes. The headlines wrote themselves: "Reeves schools Marsh, integrity under fire." Commentators called it the moment the debate turned into a moral lesson. In an era addicted to outrage, a single calm voice had reminded the nation what real strength looks like, not in attack, but in restraint. Senator Daniel Reeves turned another page in his folder, his finger tracing a highlighted paragraph. "Caroline," he said evenly, "you once said that families should never be pulled into political crossfire. Those were your exact words, weren't they?" The crowd's low murmurs swelled to a hum. Reporters scribbled furiously, underlining political crossfire and scrawling argument unraveling in their notebooks. Phones lit up across the audience, notifications flashing as clips began circulating online. The camera zoomed in on Congresswoman Caroline Marsh's hands gripping the edge of the desk, her knuckles pale beneath the studio lights. "Those were general principles," she countered, her tone sharp but fraying at the edges. "Context matters, Senator. We're here to talk about lobbying ethics, not dissect every quote I've ever made." She straightened her papers with trembling fingers, trying to redirect the conversation. Americans care about real issues: jobs, healthcare, fairness, not nitpicking words from past interviews. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. The other panelists sat in silence, exchanging uneasy glances. Even the floor manager, headset on, hesitated before signaling the moderator, who chose not to intervene. The tension had become too compelling to cut away from. Reeves didn't rush. His calm was unnerving. "Context doesn't erase principles," he said quietly. "You've built a career on calling for civility in public discourse, on reminding us that leadership begins with restraint." He flipped to another tabbed page, his tone measured but resolute. "You once said that attacking a public servant's spouse or family undermines democracy itself." The words landed like a slow, controlled detonation. Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters froze mid-scribble, then wrote in bold, "Undermines democracy itself." From the anchor desk, one of the commentators whispered off mic, "He's boxing her in." "Perfectly." Caroline's jaw tightened. "That's twisting my meaning," she said, her pitch rising. "I was talking about extreme cases, threats, harassment, not a casual debate comment." Her hands fluttered over her notes, rearranging them without direction. The cameras caught every nervous flick of her eyes, every shallow breath. Reeves leaned forward, his gaze steady. "If it was casual," he asked softly, "why make it at all? You've always said that leaders should model the respect they expect. You can't champion boundaries one day and cross them the next." The silence that followed was almost tangible. The clock on the wall ticked past 15 minutes. The debate had transformed from a policy discussion into something much deeper, a test of character unfolding live. Caroline, once so confident, now struggled to find footing. Every attempt to pivot back to policy sounded defensive, even hollow. The audience sensed it too, their murmurs shifting into quiet nods of agreement. The producers debated in low tones behind the glass, one whispering, "This is brutal, but you can't look away." Reeves closed his folder briefly, resting his hands atop it. "You've warned us all," he said, "that when politics gets personal, the people lose faith. You said those exact words at the Unity Forum 2 years ago." He looked directly at her. "And yet, here we are, off track because you made it personal." Caroline swallowed, her face tight with controlled frustration. "We all speak passionately in the heat of the moment," she said quickly. "Let's move back to solutions. Americans deserve progress, not performative sparring." Reeves nodded slowly, then reopened his folder. "The heat of the moment doesn't excuse hypocrisy," he said, voice calm but cutting. "You've taught that words matter, that accountability begins with our own." The room fell still again. Even the other panelists had stopped pretending to take notes. One of them leaned back, whispering, "This just became a masterclass." Reeves continued, quoting another of her past statements. "You said that respecting personal boundaries preserves the integrity of our institutions. You called it the foundation of ethical leadership." He let the words hang, his voice steady. "Do those principles only apply when they're convenient?" The audience murmured, a wave of recognition washing through the crowd. Reporters underlined integrity of institutions and ethical leadership in their notebooks. The control room buzzed with restrained excitement. "This clip's going to break records," someone said. Caroline took a breath, searching for composure, but it was too late. The balance had shifted entirely. Reeves hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted her, hadn't even interrupted. He'd simply held her to her own standard, and she couldn't meet it. As the moderator finally stepped in to close the segment, the audience broke into spontaneous applause. It wasn't for drama. It was for clarity. For once, a debate had ended not in noise, but in truth. That night, the headlines spread fast. "Reeves holds the line. Principles over politics." And across millions of screens, viewers replayed one simple moment, proof that integrity, when tested, still had power. "Caroline," Senator Daniel Reeves said, his tone steady but edged with quiet conviction, "remember your own words on unity. You said, 'Division begins the moment we drag each other's families into the fight.'" The audience reacted immediately, a ripple of recognition spreading across the room. A few gasps, a murmur of approval, and then the unmistakable buzz of phones lighting up as clips began circulating in real time. In the control booth, a producer whispered, "It's going viral already." On stage, Congresswoman Caroline Marsh stiffened. "You're cherry-picking quotes to fit your point," she snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. "That's not fair play." She glanced at the moderator for backup, but he didn't move. The moment had transcended moderation. It had become a reckoning too captivating to interrupt. Reeves didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, a calm half-smile at the corners of his mouth. "These aren't cherries, Caroline," he said. "They're from your own orchard. You planted these ideas publicly, and now they're bearing fruit." The audience chuckled softly, the tension thinning for a heartbeat, but the metaphor hit home. Caroline's expression darkened. Reeves had just reminded everyone that her own philosophy was being used against her. As the segment clock passed 20 minutes, the debate evolved into something more profound. Reeves wasn't just countering arguments. He was deconstructing contradictions. His voice remained measured, professorial even, as he spoke. "You've often said empathy is the cornerstone of public service, that behind every leader is a human being with a private life deserving respect. I agree. I live by that." He turned another page, quoting from a past speech she'd delivered at a national forum. "Without compassion," you said, "politics becomes performance." He paused. "So tell me, where was that compassion when you made it personal?" Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Empathy goes both ways, Senator," she shot back. "Perhaps you should practice what you preach." But the comeback landed flat, her words brittle against his calm composure. The other panelists, sensing the discomfort, tried to intervene. "Let's steer this back to the topic," one suggested hesitantly. Reeves nodded politely. "Exactly. The topic is ethics. And nothing defines ethics more than consistency in principle. His response drew a small round of applause from parts of the audience. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. They knew this was turning into one of those unforgettable television moments that would replay across the nation for days. Reeves pressed on, every word deliberate. Caroline, you've criticized the media for amplifying personal attacks, for turning disagreements into character assassinations. And yet tonight, you amplified one yourself. The crowd reacted with an audible gasp. Reporters wrote amplified one yourself in bold, circling it twice. From the anchor desk, one whispered, "This isn't a debate anymore. It's a masterclass." Caroline, visibly flustered, tried to regroup. "This is a distraction," she insisted, her voice rising. "You're twisting this conversation into something it was never meant to be." Her papers trembled in her hands as she gestured toward the audience. "We should be talking about real solutions, policy, reform, things that matter." Reeves's reply was steady, almost surgical. "The only distraction," he said, "is the one created when integrity takes a back seat to impulse. You've spent years calling for accountability in leadership. This is that moment." Her eyes flashed. "You're setting me up." He shook his head slowly. "No, Caroline. You set yourself up when you crossed the line you once warned others not to cross." The crowd murmured louder, a low wave of agreement spreading through the seats. Behind the glass wall, producers whispered rapidly, one saying, "He's dismantling her argument brick by brick." Another added, "Don't cut to commercial, let it breathe." The clock hit 25 minutes. Caroline, once commanding and confident, now clung to her notes like a lifeline. Her earlier eloquence had given way to short, clipped retorts. Reeves, still calm, closed his folder for a moment, as though to mark the end of a chapter. He looked directly into the camera. "We talk about ethics as if it's a policy topic," he said quietly. "But it's not. It's a personal compass. And when we lose that compass, no law, no reform, no speech can guide us back." The audience erupted into spontaneous applause. The control room lit up with messages. Networks were already drafting headlines. But then, as the noise settled, a new vibration rippled through the press row. Reporters looked down at their phones simultaneously. A push alert flashed across their screens. "Breaking. Internal memo leaked. Marsh calls family attacks in politics a grave political blunder." The timing was electric. The revelation hit like a second thunderclap in an already charged room. Reeves didn't react. He didn't need to. The audience's collective gasp said everything. Caroline's face drained of color as the irony crystallized in real time. Her private caution had just confirmed his public point. Reeves folded his hands once more, voice soft but resonant. "And there," he said, "is the proof. You knew it then. You know it now." The cameras stayed on her face for a lingering moment, just long enough for the truth to settle in. The debate wasn't about winning anymore. It was about who still believed in what they preached. By the time the broadcast ended, one headline dominated every feed: Reeves versus Marsh, when integrity went live. And across the country, millions watched and whispered the same thing. Finally, someone held the line. A gasp spread through the studio like a sudden gust of wind. It wasn't rehearsed. It was pure, collective shock. Reporters froze mid-sentence, then scrambled to underline the words internal memo and serious political blunder across their notepads. On the side desk, an anchor whispered off mic, "This just flipped the whole debate." The floor manager darted forward, placing a printed sheet discreetly on the moderator's desk while the cameras stayed tight on the stage. The audience murmured, a wave of restless energy passing through the rows. From her seat, Nancy's eyes dropped to her phone, half hidden beneath her notes. The faint glow of the screen confirmed what she feared. Her face paled, the confident set of her jaw faltering for the first time. Senator Kennedy sat perfectly still, his calm a striking counterpoint to the tension erupting around him. He didn't reach for the memo, didn't even glance at the growing commotion. He waited, letting the whispers rise and fall like an incoming tide. The segment clock blinked past 28 minutes. Every second felt stretched thin. In the control room, producers hovered over the feed. "Keep rolling," the director ordered, hand raised. "No cuts. No commercial." The air in the studio thickened, the lights seeming brighter, harsher, as if they too demanded honesty. Kennedy leaned forward at last, his voice level, his tone surgical. Nancy, he began, each syllable deliberate. You've stood here defending the idea that families are fair game in politics. But your own memo, your own words, call that a serious political blunder. Which version should the American people believe? The question landed like a strike. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. Reporters underlined which version in heavy ink, some adding arrows, exclamation marks. The split screen caught Nancy's face, a mixture of disbelief and realization. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Even the band held their cue, frozen in the charged silence. Then she spoke, voice thinner than before. That memo was private correspondence, she said quickly. Taken out of context. Misinterpreted. She straightened, trying to recapture authority, but her hands betrayed her, nervous, restless against her stack of notes. The audience murmured again. Suspicion crept into the air. Phones lit up across the seats as viewers posted clips, hashtags already spiraling into trending territory. One of the other panelists shot a desperate look toward the production team, but no one intervened. This was no longer a debate, it was history in real time. Kennedy calmly opened his folder to a fresh page, his preparation almost unnerving. Private or not, your words carry weight, he said, steady as stone. You wrote that attacking families in political discourse is not only unethical, it undermines credibility. Those are your words. The quote detonated. A ripple of exclamations swept the room. Reporters circled the phrase undermines credibility in their notes, drawing arrows back to her earlier attack on Kennedy's wife. The anchors exchanged glances. He's got the memo, one mouthed silently. Nancy's composure cracked. This is an ambush, she snapped. Using private communication to score points. This isn't how serious people debate. She gestured toward the reporters, who were now photographing the memo, capturing the time-stamped headline. Kennedy didn't flinch. An ambush requires surprise, he said evenly. This isn't surprise, it's substance. You wrote it. You set the ethical bar. Now you're refusing to meet it. The crowd reacted instantly, murmurs swelling into low, thunderous approval. A few even clapped before realizing where they were. The cameras zoomed closer on Nancy, her expression taut, a flash of frustration replacing her earlier confidence. She tried to recover, her tone rising. That memo referred to extreme cases, not to ordinary debate, she insisted. You're twisting it. Kennedy turned another page, slow and deliberate. Your memo doesn't say extreme. It says any involvement of family members in political rhetoric is a strategic blunder. Those are your words again, not mine. The tension hit its breaking point. The audience shifted forward, drawn by the magnetism of unraveling truth. Reporters typed furiously, one muttering, "This will dominate headlines for weeks." Nancy's response faltered as the crowd's quiet judgment settled in. The contrast between her defensiveness and his composure was stark, an image that would soon be replayed across every major network. The studio buzzed with that peculiar electricity that only surfaces when conviction meets contradiction. Kennedy didn't gloat or grandstand. He simply sat back, voice low but clear. Integrity isn't about what's convenient, he said. It's about what's consistent. No one spoke after that. Even the moderator stayed silent, sensing the gravity of what had just unfolded. The red lights above the cameras glowed steady, capturing the moment the tide turned, and the truth, once buried, finally took center stage. The press row had become a living organism, humming, shifting, breathing tension. Reporters fired off messages with one hand while scrawling quotes with the other. Flash notifications glowed across their screens as Nancy tried to regain control of the narrative. You're exploiting this leak to dodge the real conversation, she said sharply, voice edged with strain. The focus should be on lobbying reforms. That's where true ethics reform lies. She shuffled her papers, her movements jerky under the unforgiving lights. The pivot might have worked in another setting, but tonight, it reeked of retreat. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. Ethics begin with consistency, he replied calmly. You've condemned these tactics in writing and then turned around and used them. That's not reform. That's contradiction. His tone carried no venom, only the quiet weight of logic. The irony in his words hit harder than any accusation. The crowd murmured again, a ripple of awareness threading through the air. One of the panelists, voice tentative, tried to intercede. Maybe we should clarify the context of the memo. Kennedy cut in seamlessly, his rhythm unbroken. The context is the point. She called it a blunder. Denying it now only makes the inconsistency clearer. Nancy's voice wavered. This is character assassination, not discussion. Kennedy shook his head gently. No, Nancy. This is accountability. You've built your brand on transparency. Let's live it. By the 35-minute mark, the balance of power had flipped completely. What began as her offensive had become her unraveling. The memo wasn't Kennedy's weapon. It was her mirror. His calm precision, his refusal to gloat or grandstand, underscored the contrast. The audience, once leaning in for spectacle, now leaned in for meaning. Even the director, headset crackling, refused to cut away. Stay with it, he murmured. This is lightning in a bottle. Kennedy pressed on, connecting every line of her memo to her own public statements. You warned that these tactics erode public trust, he said, voice steady, unflinching. Yet here you are, under these lights, doing exactly that. Nancy's rebuttal came fast, disjointed. It's being twisted, completely twisted, she said, hands gesturing in frustration. Twisted, Kennedy replied evenly. These are your words, unedited. Accountability isn't something we apply selectively. The studio buzzed with whispers. Phones lit up like a constellation. Viewers, bloggers, journalists, all relaying the moment in real time. A handful of audience members exchanged looks that said what none of them dared to voice aloud. He had her. Nancy tried once more to change course. Let's talk solutions, she said, her tone turning conciliatory. That's what the public wants, solutions, not old memos. Kennedy didn't hesitate. Solutions require trust, he said. And trust requires consistency. Your own memo demands it. The question is, will you honor it? Silence followed. Heavy, resonant, almost physical. By now, the debate had stretched past 39 minutes. Nancy's earlier authority had dissolved into visible fatigue. Her once crisp notes were scattered, her composure fragmented under the weight of her own contradictions. Kennedy, in contrast, seemed untouched by the pressure. His folder lay closed on the desk, his posture upright but relaxed. The lights cast a soft sheen over the table, framing him in quiet command. The control room buzzed with static energy. Do we cut? A producer whispered. The director shook his head. We let it breathe. Kennedy adjusted his microphone, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Nancy, he began softly, his tone both respectful and resolute. You've had every chance tonight to turn this back to policy, to the issues that matter most. But instead, you chose to cross the very line you've warned others not to cross. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Each one landed like a verdict, deliberate and final. A quiet gasp rolled through the audience. Reporters underlined crossed a line in thick strokes, their pens trembling with the awareness of a defining moment. On the anchor desk, one whispered off mic, "This is history." Nancy sat frozen, her face pale under the studio lights, her hands still atop the scattered papers. The crowd's silence stretched, deep and heavy. The studio seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the truth of the moment. When preparation met conviction, and one voice, steady and sure, turned the tide of the debate without ever needing to shout. And in that silence, every viewer watching understood, this wasn't just about a memo. It was about integrity and the cost of losing it. Every eye in the studio was fixed on the stage. The air itself seemed to tighten as Nancy leaned toward her microphone, her composure cracking. "Senator," she began, her voice taut and trembling at the edges, "this entire thing has been exaggerated. We're public figures. Scrutiny is part of the job." She gestured toward the cameras with an unsteady hand, her attempt at control slipping through her fingers. Kennedy didn't interrupt, but when he spoke, his tone cut through the air like a blade. Calm, sharp, deliberate. "Scrutiny of actions and policies, yes," he said evenly, "but families? You've said it yourself. That's where integrity falters." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his words rested on truth, not theatrics. He recalled her past speeches about the need for civility, her repeated calls for respect even amid disagreement. The split screen showed the contrast starkly, her faltering expression against his steady resolve. As the clock ticked past 42 minutes, Kennedy began to weave every thread of the evening into a single, tightening narrative. Your memo, your speeches, your columns, he said, his voice steady as stone. They all point to a leader who values boundaries and respect. Yet tonight, you ignored them. That's not just inconsistency, Nancy, that's a choice. A subtle wave of acknowledgement moved through the audience. The phones that had been glowing earlier now dimmed, forgotten, as people absorbed the gravity of the moment. Reporters wrote furiously, circling the phrase inconsistency is a choice as though they already knew it would headline tomorrow's front pages. Nancy tried to respond, her tone defensive and fragile. Choices made in the heat of debate don't define who we are, she said. But her words carried no weight, no conviction, only the hollow echo of retreat. Kennedy didn't rush his reply. He let the silence linger long enough for her defense to dissolve into the stillness. Then, leaning forward slightly, he spoke with calm finality. Dragging family into a debate is an argument, he said quietly. It's cowardice pretending to be conviction. The impact was immediate. The audience gasped, a sharp, collective intake of breath that filled the space like thunder rolling through a valley. In the press row, reporters scrawled cowardice pretending to be conviction in block letters. Every camera in the studio stayed locked on the stage, capturing the unmistakable shift, the moment when the debate turned into a reckoning. Nancy froze, color draining from her face, fingers gripping the chair's armrests as though bracing herself against the weight of her own words. Kennedy rose slowly, buttoning his jacket with the same composure he'd maintained throughout. He nodded courteously to the moderator, then to his fellow panelists. His exit wasn't a victory lap, it was a statement in itself. The quiet click of his shoes against the floor echoed like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. The moderator cleared his throat, trying to form words, but the moment had swallowed the air. The producers signaled for a cut, but the director held the camera steady, capturing the image of Nancy alone beneath the lights, her expression a blend of disbelief and dawning realization. When the broadcast finally faded to commercial, the story had already escaped into the world. Social media feeds exploded with clips, hashtags, and headlines. Viewers replayed the exchange, their comment sections filling not with outrage but reflection. Kennedy's composure had done more than win a debate. It had reminded the nation what accountability looks like when stripped of spin. Yet beyond the drama and the viral headlines, the exchange carried something deeper, a moral clarity that transcended politics. It reminded everyone watching that words have power. They can heal or they can wound. They can bridge divides or build walls. In an age when public discourse often rewards noise over nuance, Kennedy had chosen restraint over retaliation, and in doing so, revealed the real meaning of strength. True integrity isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention, it earns respect. Kennedy's poise under pressure showed that leadership isn't about silencing opponents, but about standing firm in principle. His calm dismantling of falsehood exposed a truth too often forgotten. Consistency between what we say and what we do is the foundation of trust. When we call for civility, we must model it. When we draw ethical lines, we must honor them ourselves. The moment also underscored a vital truth about modern dialogue. Involving someone's family or private life in public debate doesn't elevate an argument, it diminishes it. It shows weakness, not conviction. Every time we cross that line, we erode the respect that keeps our democracy alive. For anyone watching, it was more than political theater, it was a mirror. It invited reflection. How often do we let frustration push us past fairness? How often do we trade decency for the thrill of being right? Kennedy's example offered an alternative: courage without cruelty, truth without arrogance. When the debate lights dimmed and the studio emptied, one thing lingered, a lesson etched into the minds of millions. Grace under pressure is not a tactic, it's a testament. And when paired with integrity, it can turn even the fiercest confrontation into a moment of moral clarity. As the country digested the night's events, a single message echoed far beyond the studio: lead with character. Speak with care. Debate with dignity. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voice that prevails. It's the one that stays true to its principles.